Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to Three Things I've Learned with me, Susan Dolci, where we share the stories that shift our souls. So apparently I'm feeling kind of rebellious lately because on my last show, I broke one of my own cardinal rules and we discussed politics. Today, I'm also breaking the other cardinal rule of polite dinner conversation, and we're discussing religion. But the truth is that this particular conversation, for me anyway, I believe this is long overdue, and I'm really fired up to talk about it. And we have a lot to share. I'm super stoked about this. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to introduce my guest for today, Margaret Mary O'Connor. Margaret Mary is the author of Scandal in the Shadows, The Original Priest, Mother Mary, which was just released earlier this year. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Buffalo and has a Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry from Christ the King Seminary in East Aurora, New York. She's an active advocate for women's ordination and church accountability regarding the Catholic priest sexual abuse issue. She's also a member of Call to Action, Future Church, Roman Catholic Women Priests, and the Women's Ordination Conference. She believes that every Catholic deserves the truth from Rome instead of the continual outright deception. Please help me welcome Margaret Mary O'Connor to the show.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's really a pleasure to be here and talk on, as you said, an overdue subject.
Certainly. I mean, I've been talking about this topic sort of like quietly for years because I used to live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's a very, very Catholic town. And I mean, this kind of talk is heretical, right? You don't talk about this in those circles. But I have to tell you a story about what happened yesterday. And I can say that to me, I've kind of coined it as like a tiny mini miracle. So in the promos leading up to the show, I don't know if like those of you who follow me on social media, I kind of have like, it's a show week, I have a theme. And one of the quotes I put up was from Joan Chittister. You quote her in the book too, yes. Margaret Mary. And she's a Benedictine nun. And I went to an all-girls school, Catholic high school in the north side of Chicago called St. Scholastica Academy. And it was founded by a monastery of Benedictine nuns. So these women were huge in my character formation. Mm-hmm. And those were some of I had such an amazing time at that school, and all of the teachers and all the sisters, except for maybe the few who shushed you in the library. Anyway, they were all amazing women. And there was this one particular nun that kept coming to mind as I was reading your book. And there was something about you and something about the topic that reminded me of her. And she was my sophomore religion teacher. And one of the things that I remember, like one memory, like if there's a standout memory from my high school, it was morning. I think it was my first bill, religion was. And we walked into the classroom and our teacher wasn't there and the sister wasn't there and the principal was there. And she said, hey, you're going to have to find some silent reading to do. Sister, whose name I will share in a little bit, she's not going to be here today because she was arrested yesterday and she's in jail for some protest. I don't recall what she was protesting at the time, but she was in jail. And so she was going to be there. And all of this was just quite, it wasn't like sister's in jail. It was like, yeah, she's in jail. They were proud of their attitudes towards social justice or social injustices. And these were brave, courageous women who just didn't stand down, fearless in the face of what most people would consider dangerous. So wait, it gets better. So I started to do my show notes yesterday. And I thought, I have to find her name. Like, I just keep referring to her and I need to know her name. So luckily, the bin of yearbooks was accessible. And I dug out my sophomore yearbook, and I had to go all the way to the back of the book before I found her. And her name was Sister Judith Beaumont. And so I was like, okay, like, what happened with Sister Judy? Like, that's right. Oh my God, she was amazing. So of course, what's the first thing you do? And I Googled her, right? Like, where did life take her? Is she alive? What's happened? So I found her name, and I'm reading her obituary. She passed in 2018. And if y'all don't mind, I need to read part of her obituary, and it's relevant to the rest of our talk today. So, Sister Judith Ann, lifelong fighter for peace and justice, succumbed to AML. Let's skip ahead. Life was precious to her, and she was dedicated entirely to the service of the poor. She was a sister of Saint Benedict at Saint Scholastica in Chicago for 34 years. She was a teacher of math and religion and assisted in the resettlement of Cambodian and Vietnamese refugees. She earned her MRE degree from Loyola University in Chicago. She moved to Hartford, Connecticut in 1981. This is where things get more interesting. To participate in work for peace and justice, including the Plowshares Action. She was part of Trident 9. So if you're not familiar with Plowshares Action, they were an or maybe still are, an anti-nuclear movement to do away with nuclear weapons. And so she spent a year in prison for, basically it was vandalism and maybe trespassing also, but for for this anti-nuke movement she was a part of. So being a part in her prison time in Connecticut for this act of conscience included successful prison reform for women. She then worked at My Sister's Place in Hartford, Connecticut, a shelter for women and children. I'm going to jump ahead. She moved to Fort Myers, Florida in 1998. There she worked with various churches in the Diocese of Venice. 4 different cancers slowed her down. Here comes the big part. In 2012, she was ordained a Roman Catholic woman priest and became pastor of the Good Shepherd Inclusive Catholic Community in Fort Myers, Florida.
Was that part of the Roman Catholic woman priest group?
Yes.
Bishop initially. Oh wow, that is.
I don't know if she was one of the first ones, but she was ordained in 2012, and so of course I had to click. They've got the link in her obit, and I clicked on it, and there she was. She's an ordained woman Catholic priest.
Wonderful. She finally had a wish, that came true.
Well, and so the funny thing is, I felt like she was whispering in my ear the whole time. Like, and I was like, okay, Sister Judith, I felt your presence and your energy, and then to know that you were actually ordained, like this is meant to be. Like you were meant to be on the show today. Sister Judith had her hand in it.
Boy, that is unreal.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I was like, and I ran around and I'm telling my family, and they're like, oh, okay. And I'm like, my best friend will know. She'll get it. She'll think this is cool. So anyway, I digress. But so now we're going to get down to the nitty gritty and talk about this stuff. But again, I just needed to share that with you because one of these women
because it is refreshing. I mean, she has every right to be a woman priest. And
yeah, and she was just like, I'm not surprised that she, ended up leaving the Benedictines and still doing all of her social justice work and all of her, the prison reform. And she was such a voice for the voiceless. And that's one of the things that they taught me in my high school was, listen, the Benedictine rule of listening with an open heart and being a voice for the voiceless. And she lived that till the day she died.
She sure did.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those who aren't aware of the history of the Catholic Church, can you explain a little bit about when and why the church prohibited women from being deacons and priests in the first place? Because, of course, I've read your book. I've read all sorts of history books on this topic also, because it just fascinates me. But there are documents and there's archaeology and there's artwork that all indicates that they ordained women.
There is so much, in fact, that Sister Chris Schenck has a book out on that, Crispina and her sisters, and they really go into that in more detail, into the catacombs and, you know, what the different pictures meant. But if you go back into the early church, you have to really understand, where did men right from the beginning literally have that right to put women down? And it went way back when Rome was in charge of everything. And unfortunately, the Latin-speaking theologians from our church, they basically incorporated the Roman law. And the Roman law, they shaped that. But you have to remember, Roman civil law, as far as a woman went, if you weren't a rich woman, predominantly, there were so many more that were, I mean, they were poor, they had nothing. And at that time, men dominated over women. So if you didn't have money, you were a woman, that was a strike against you. You literally had nothing, you were nothing. So these theologians already had these preconceived ideas working off of the Roman civil law and then shaping that into their church law. Well, let's face it, if you're a woman right from the beginning, you had 3-4 strokes against you. And there was total, I call it insanity. There were canon lawyers. One was Peter Damian, and they had this big obsession about women being impure, of course, from you at that time of the month. And this one man was basically comparing, if you had like these violent storms, and if you could like basically have from the menstruation have blood out there, that would stop these wicked storms. But if a dog came in contact with this, they would go wild, they would go mad. In your house, if you had silverware, that would tarnish. I mean, it just went on and on. They saw women as nothing. They were unclean. They were sinful. And of course, they weren't made in the image of God. So you had all these beliefs that, I mean, are proven with biblical research. That's all cultural prejudice. Mm-hmm. And the Catholic Church even has about 5 points that they refer to as explicit biblical reasons why women can't become priests. And again, the latest research shows they are not biblical. They're cultural in nature. And the first one is that men believe that women were not made in the image of God, because how could we be made in the image of God when they had dominion over women? They had complete authority over them. So then we move on to the one about teaching. It was believed that women never had a right to teach in our church. And you'll hear like 1 Corinthians verses, or 1 Corinthians 14 verses 34, 35, or even 1 Timothy 2:12. Well, here again, there was a common law, and basically it said that women intellectually were so feeble-minded and had so much emotional instability, and of course they to be out in public, I mean, how could they do this? But with this common law, of course, it was more prevalent in women than it was in men. And then the third point is that women, we carry the punishment for Eve's sin, because we know with Adam and Eve that it was all strictly Eve's problem in the garden, that, what happened. But they go way back to Genesis. And if a woman was believed to have sin, obviously she's not going to be the most stellar candidate for priesthood. But miraculously, within the early church, there were candidates within the church who were perfect candidates for priesthood. And of course, that was the men. Then there's the one that said, just because Jesus explicitly picked the 12 men as the apostles, right away, that was meant to mean that at no time, presently or in the future, would he want women to be women priests. And of course, that again, that's cultural bias. And then lastly, because Jesus was a man, we can't have a woman up on the altar performing priestly functions. But my question is, okay, that was back in the early centuries that they believed these reasons were biblically, that was it. They had some credence to them. But with this new research, why hasn't our church hierarchy disavowed these and have come out and say that no, these aren't biblically, these are culturally related ideas or thoughts? Why haven't they made that change?
Especially in the current situation in the Catholic Church. As you cited in your book, despite the obvious sexual abuse scandal, parishes are closing because there aren't priests to service them. And it makes no sense to prohibit people from the sacraments and or make people have to travel farther just because you don't believe women have the capacity or the right to be ordained. It's just ludicrous to me.
There was a chapter in Gary Macy's book, and it was basically speaking about, women's ordination and why women ended up, being removed from their positions. And there was this one man, and he basically started coming out and saying that like women never were ordained, or they never really were in that church law that would allow them to be so. And then others started speaking up. But he had another quote in there, and it came down to how any bit of woman's history was deliberately covered up. It was thought to be delusion, at best something else. So you look back, way back in the early church, you have their views against women, and then you move up into the Middle Ages, and you have those fathers with their views. And someone can look back and say, oh, we can laugh, that's crazy. But no, because those views are still staring at us right now. They're present. They're as alive as ever. And again, the question is why the hierarchy is not doing anything. And I really believe if there's going to be any change, we have to make our hierarchy accountable, because they're in the driver's seat right now. They completely say, as far as women's equality in the church, this simply isn't an issue. So what does that mean? That means that they don't have to be asked any upsetting questions or being harassed by the press. And so then where does that leave the average everyday woman?
What was the one, I'm sure you could quote it properly, but actually I was surprised because I believe Pope Francis said it, and it was about that women attained their goal for feminism when they got the right to vote.
Oh, yes.
And that the rest of this is just a feminist agenda for women wanting to be priests. Yeah.
We achieved our rights. The people back then, the ladies, back in the 20s. So basically from the 1920s onward, women were in the driver's seat. We have no problems. But seriously, take that issue, the woman's issue, and bring it into the church. And it's not on the hierarchy's radar. Not at all. And I mean, that's.
We're gonna take a little break. I could do this show without any breaks because I'm so passionate about this topic. But we're gonna take a little break, and when we come back, I want to dive a little deeper into Mary as the original priest. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and we'll be right back. welcome back. This is Three Things I've Learned with me, Susan Dolci, and my guest today is Margaret Mary O'Connor. She's the author of the book Scandal in the Shadows, and we're talking about how the Catholic hierarchy has really limited roles for women, and how they're not opening their eyes to the future and the future of women and their roles in the church. So before we get into the whole Mary Priest thing, which is fascinating, I've never thought about it in those terms. I want to, can you let people know where they can find you?
Yes, it's yourradicaltruth.com, yourradicaltruth.com.
And I believe you have if you go to your website, you have chapter 4 that people can download for free.
It's free.
And chapter 4 is awesome. It's about presenting the truth. However, get the whole book. Read the whole book. Don't settle for just chapter 4. It's amazing. If this is something that's been near and dear to your heart, like it has mine, it opened my eyes to so many new organizations and new ways to get the word out there to promote women's rights in the church. So can you explain for people who haven't read your book, what the term the original priest, Mother Mary, what does that mean?
I wanted them to understand that she was the original priest. Some people think, all right, well, gee, maybe this is just some type of an honorary term that Mary, Mother, is a priest. And you have to go back with the term Immaculate Conception in order in 1854 for the church to give that title to Mary. They had to actually prove that she was a priest. And what they used was they took from tradition, Hebrews 7:26. It is fitting that we honor such a high priest. Mary, even though she never received a sacramental ordination, which we have today in the church, or either did Jesus, the Holy Spirit at her anointing, she basically received the same priestly anointing that Jesus did. And after Jesus, she really is the first priest. And I just wanted it to stick out that she is the original priest. Like after Jesus, she's the first one.
So you explained that, I forget what year, there was a prayer that ended that was like dedicated to her, and it said Mary Priest in the prayer, correct?
Yes, that was back around 1906. And there was a pope that used it. And basically, beyond Mary, Mother of God, being called a priest, her term was Mary Priest. And now this was really exciting. She had the title as the model of all priesthood in the Catholic Church. And basically, the priests were praying to her, like to help them, through their priesthood. And when you think of it, back in the 1900s, when you compare 2,000 years of church history, that's pretty close for us. And back in 1903, there was a pope, now I'm killing his name, but he received actually a painting, Leo XIII. He received a painting of Mary in priestly dress, in chasuble, in stole. And he was able, through the Roman officials, it was allowed for him to hang that picture up. Okay, that's 1903.
That's recent, in my opinion.
Everything changes. No longer can we have that picture of Mary up there. And then 1926, 27, this is when everything fell apart. The hierarchy of the church completely removed the title or giving any, adoration towards Mary. That was it. Her whole title, everything was taken away. And right away, I think it would get anyone's curiosity up wait a minute, this is Jesus's mother. What are these officials doing? Why are they taking that away from her?
Yeah, the question that always comes up for me is why are the men so intimidated? What are they so afraid of? It's like we all have heard of as Mary Magdalene being the apostle to the apostles, but at the same time, they'll say there were no women present at the Last Supper. This is one of my favorite things, one of my favorite comebacks, when people say, even my female friends was like, well, there were no women at the Last Supper. And I'll say, okay, maybe they weren't painted that way. However, I'm sure they did all the cooking and all the preparations, because that's what good Jewish women did, right? That's what they. So do you think there would have been a Passover Seder without women there? I mean, come on.
Yes, and that's the latest research is that they're saying that at the Last Supper was a Seder meal. And of course, Jesus's mother, the whole family would go to things like that. And one sister had an article, and it was priceless. And she basically, in so many words, she said, "Do you mean to tell me that Mary came to the door and Jesus said, 'Oh, sorry, Mom, the guys, we're having whatever, the meal tonight. You can't come.'" It's just total, and it's more insanity the more you think about it. But John Wingard's had a great book, The Ordination of Woman in the Catholic Church. And he came up and said, basically, is this a coincidence? At the time that they removed Mary's title, other women from other church denominations were starting to bring up the issue of a woman priest. So when you look at it in that context, it seems to, not trying to make a supposition, but it's just strange that it was that same year.
Yeah, I like the story that well, I guess it's not a story. It's more of an analogy of why, like, discerning, and that men are allowed to have that opportunity to discern, pathway to the priesthood, but women aren't. Can you tell that story? Because I think this is like you gave it's not a story, it's an analogy, but it's really potent.
Oh, yes. I was out picketing, and there was a policeman, and he basically said, "Don't you women have something better to do?" And I said, "Well," I said, "Give me a chance here." I said, "Let's just pretend you belong. New York Yankees is your favorite team." And he says, "No, the Boston Red Sox are." I said, "All right." I said, "Just this one time, we can talk Boston Red Sox." And I said, "What happens if your son wanted to be a priest?" And he finally someday comes to you, and you have to say, "Well, son, I'm sorry. The Boston Red Sox have told us that there never were men priests." But lo and behold, sometime later, your son is doing research and says, "Dad, this is just fabulous, wonderful. There were men baseball players, back in the history, but that was until the woman took their rights away." So now we move that out of the context of the American Baseball Association, and let's go into the church, and we have the Catholic Church hierarchy. And you're with your daughter, and she asked, "Gee, why, Ma'am, I think I'd like to be a woman priest." And you have to tell her, "No, I'm sorry. We've been told by the Catholic Church hierarchy that there never were women priests." And sometime later, your daughter's doing research. "Mom, look at, there were women priests." Well, whether it was the men or the woman, how would you feel if you came to that realization that it was right there, past history is there, and that you've been totally deceived? Are you going to be hurt? Are you going to be angry? And it was like an aha moment, because this police officer, there was just that pause. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting because it made him, for a minute, maybe try to get a little feeling of what we feel as ladies, being totally deceived and even duped. I mean, that is a harsh word to use, but I believe it fits there.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. And the another thing that I've always, and I know you've encountered this too, and I just recently encountered it, is how women get angry. Women get angry when people like you and me, and we speak up and we're like, why, we can't fathom why this shouldn't be allowed today. Why we can't explore this, or, look at the history. I follow Father James Martin on Facebook, and I don't even remember what he was, because he gets very controversial. I love him. He's not afraid to put it out there. Very supportive of the gay community, and he's just amazing. He's written some awesome books too. Pardon me?
Open-minded.
Yeah, very open-minded. He anyway, I don't even remember what his controversial topic was at the time, but one woman commented, women should not be priests. And I got my panties in a bunch. I was very upset. And I don't normally comment because he has very strict rules on commenting. And I just said, well, wait a minute. It wasn't Mary Magdalene, the first one, at Jesus's grave, at the resurrection. She was told, she was, commanded by Jesus to go and tell the others. She's called the apostle to the apostles. How does Jesus not, how can we even imagine that Jesus would not support and want to have women as part of any church? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And then I got a little pat on my back. I was like, oh, good job, Susan, because right after Father James commented the same thing, basically, and I was like, you go, girl. Okay. Anyway, yeah, have you encountered that where women get really feisty and
Yes, and I try to figure out now, where are they coming from? And we're both familiar with the term pray and obey. And of course, it was big back before, like I grew up in the 50s, the 60s. It was way before then. And now you don't hear that. So not all the older generation, but a lot of the generation, they literally wouldn't question anything. And basically, when we were in the church before Vatican II, that was it. I mean, we're part of the church, but we're not. We stay in our pews. We keep our mouths shut. But I mean, let's face it, that period is way past. Mm-hmm. And what really irritated me was not only on the woman priest issue, but I also pick it on the priest sexual abuse issue. Is
also
that
very hot topic.
Women would just come out of the church and they were literally irate. You're the ones that are causing the church to collapse. I mean, you just couldn't. And then one lady, it was the middle of winter, and she whipped her coat open. I thought, oh my God, does she have a gun? She had a cup of holy water, and I was on the far side, and she started blessing, and she's getting to me, and I said, listen, lady, I know I'm Catholic. I know exactly what's going on inside that church. And she just looked at me, and I said, no offense, but how dare you say that we are ruining the church? We love the church, but we don't believe it's right for any priest to rape a child. So just tell me help me understand, what are we doing wrong? And there was dead silence. So many women, when I pick it, well, I would just be so uncomfortable going to a woman for confession.
Which that's the last thing I don't understand. It's like, I want a female gynecologist, but I want a male priest in the confessional. Like, I just don't get it.
So I said, well, you could always go to a male priest. Oh, but no, seriously, that's the one thing, and that's what's hurting us on this issue, is that so many Catholics believe that it's the hierarchy. They run the show. They tell you what to believe, and how dare we ever question that. So you have that. But beyond that, I think a lot of other people are in denial because let's face it, when I first realized that the church had betrayed my own trust, I, uh, I was mad to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to decide, am I going to stay in this position of being mad and disgusted with the church, or is there something I can do? And that basically gave me the idea, the beginnings for the book, to help Catholics to get the truth out to Catholics, not only here in the US, but as well worldwide. And that's why I want this book to be a conversation initially. But beyond that conversation, I want Catholics to realize, which I do mention in there, Vatican II allowed the laity the right to speak out on issues of importance. So what could be more important if you're a woman in the church and you can't answer God's call? Shouldn't we fix that? Shouldn't we have the church hierarchy at least looking into our equality issue when they say there is no equality issue? Yet it's the hierarchy which has disavowed Jesus's own words of our equality in Galatians 3:28. There are, no male or female, all are one in Christ, or even going back in Genesis, in the divine image, God created them, male and female. I just don't understand how the hierarchy completely puts Jesus's words aside. This will be really striking for your audience because, again, so many people feel like I don't have a doctorate in theology, so how dare, or you, maybe you do, but how dare we, discuss what they should do or shouldn't do? We both love our church, but we don't enjoy being lied to. And back in 1976, the Pope has his own biblical pontifical commission. And they found out that there's absolutely no reason why a woman can't become a priest in the Catholic Church. So what has happened from 1976 to 2020? Nothing. This hierarchy just sits on that. And if you're a woman, whether a woman religious or woman laity, and you get a call that you really want to serve God as a priest, well, obviously you can't.
Right. It's ridiculous. We're gonna take another quick break, but this, and also when we come back, I want to highlight that the ways we can make some change. Like you have a petition on your website. I'd like to talk about that because now it's like we know the problem. How do we work towards a solution? So I'd love to talk to you more about that when we come back. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci, and we'll be back in a little bit. Welcome back, everybody. So you're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci. I'm sitting here with Margaret Mary O'Connor, and today we've been tackling what I consider to be a hot topic. I'm very passionate about this topic. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel privileged to be able to sit here with you, Margaret Mary, because I don't feel like this is a conversation I could have had in the past in my circle. And I would have totally been branded a heretic, probably was behind my back. Anyway, but the truth is that having women priests isn't new, and the Catholic Church has been covering this up for centuries. And one of the things that you have put up on your website, yourradicaltruth.com, is a petition. Can you tell us about this petition and where we can sign it and what you're going to do with it? What's the goal?
It's over on my website, and there's a menu across, and towards the end you'll see petition. So that'll open up for you. And basically, I am really so upset how the Catholic Church took that title away from Mary. When they actually did this, they had a Roman official commenting with a paper which it was published in, and he was just basically so pleased, and he's referring to, let's say, the publisher, that yes, you did what we wanted to this question. It was handled the right way, and this is a question that is meant to be put asleep. They're referring to Mother Mary as it and a question, like some innate object. And I just believe it. I mean, that's terrible. And that should be corrected. And you'll see I have different points there. And that's one of the top ones. By you signing the petition, if you really feel that it's a disgrace what's happened to Mary Mother, or maybe it's more another view of a woman's inequality, that's something. And by all means, this isn't a petition to be signed only by Catholics. I would really appreciate members of any other faith, whether you're male or female, and you believe that women should have be equal, their baptism, they should be equal in the church. Please sign that. And let's face it, numbers talk. And a lot of people are hesitant to go out picketing, to call people, to write letters. So I really have made it very easy. If you could look at the particulars, if you agree with any of them, I would really appreciate you signing it, because I'm trying to accrue a great number of signatures. Then this is going to be presented to Rome. And Rome has to be accountable for what they are not doing. So I can't say it in any stronger words. It is something very personal to me, because, and I just wish any other Catholic could put down your preconceived ideas, because you have been lied to by your own church. And you have every right to speak up, so you're not disobeying the church. But more than that, you're going to make our church more vibrant.
Exactly.
As you said before, right now of all times. And this is the Mary, Mother of God. It's just such a ray of hope. She's the best model for any woman
Absolutely.
who'd like to be a priest, and more importantly, for the younger girls in the church, which previously, obviously, yes, we had Mary as a model, but not as a model of being a priest.
Mm-hmm. So again, I'm all about not just complaining, but trying to find solutions. So I know there's other organizations out there that you've partnered with. One of the ones that you brought my attention to is Catholic Women Preach. They're part of Future Church, correct? That's an offset of...
It's awful now. It's either Future Church or Call to Action. I don't want to discredit them.
Well, because I remember going to one and signing up for anyway, I signed up for the newsletter for Catholic Women Preach. And just to give you an idea of what that is, every Sunday.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, there are women who are accomplished in their own right with their own, with education and service and jobs within the church, and they give their take on the reading for that week. And when we were in break, I was talking with Margaret Mary about how that's one of the things to me that seems like just a simple fix isn't the right word, but at least it's a start. If we could have women, just as the deacons do, at times they come up and they'll give the homily. Why can't women speak from the pulpit? Why can't we allow the experiences, especially when we're talking about marriage and family? Why is that? Why? I mean, to me, it's just ridiculous. It should be allowed. It would give so much more breath and life to what we experience as a community, instead of just getting this one-sided, dare I say, one-sided male opinion all the time. And so if you sign up for that, if you sign up for Catholic Women Preach, I think it's, I get it in my inbox, and it's a video, and it's just, it's maybe, I don't know what, 10 minutes, not very long.
Yeah, it isn't very long. And they've even had Sister Joan Chittister on there. And then if anyone doesn't know her, she's a real live wire, and she certainly has the pulse of our church. And she could tell the hierarchy
Oh yeah,
what they need to change. But what you were just saying, why can't we do this? It all goes back to the male hierarchy. And I really seriously believe this. They are so afraid. They are afraid of anyone else having power within the church. And I mean, that is just total insanity. And if I could just add one more thing, Jamie Mason, she used to write for the National Catholic Reporter. She's moving on to a new position, but she mentioned when our present Pope was a cardinal in 2010, he had this book on heaven and earth. And he basically said that women feminists, the only reason they want to be a Catholic priest is they want to assume male roles and they want the power. And why can't the hierarchy understand it's about any woman's spirituality in the church? When they received the call by God to serve, obviously no one was stepping in way of them. And I even like bring that hint in the book that Pope Francis, what would happen to you if at that point, you know, you weren't allowed to move on? Again, it's that they're so closed mind to it, but they have so many Catholics that are right behind the hierarchy and won't change. And I'm hoping through the conversation, and I really appreciate this, Susan, because so many podcast hosts feel that my subject is controversial. And when you think of it, I'm telling the truth.
Right. We're at the top of the hour. I hate to have to end this discussion because I could go for another hour. There's just so much to unpack here. But thank you, Margaret Mary. Thank you so much. Her website is yourradicaltruth.com. If you are interested in learning more about my coaching business and how I use my diamond process and the transformational techniques I use, I am at susandolci.com. We all have a story to tell. We can live in the story, or we can transform the story. It's your choice. Change your story, change our world. #StoryFilled. Thanks for listening, everybody.